Hi, I'm Philip from the HANA Academy. In this series of videos, we're looking at the XS Advanced model. In this video, we're going to continue building our OData version 4 Java-based service. We've already, in the previous video, I hope you've already seen that, we've set up our project, we created our CDS entry with our data structures, we use the @odata.publishTrue, and we use the template to create our Java application. Now, we ran some tests on it. We were able to see information coming from our OData service. Now we're going to create a proper UI because what we did in this, we cheated slightly because in the web XML, we just removed a security constraint that the template had created for us. So I'm going to now put that constraint back. So if we do that and now save web XML, we normally would be unauthorized to actually do the kind of calls we were doing directly on the Java servlet path. What we're going to do is create an HTML app, and we're going to create a destination that can then access this Java backend. That's normally the way you would want to run it in the real world. First thing we would do is we would go back, and we're going to need to create something called an XS security JSON file, and we're going to create our own user authentication service for our application. So the first thing there is we're going to create a new file in the tinyworld folder, so in our overall project folder. So we'll create a new file, and we're going to call that file xs-security.json. And you're going to need to put some JSON script in it, but of course, remember from the previous video, if you go to GitHub for the HANA Academy, the XSA repository within tinyworld, we've got a Java OData v4 text file, and this is where you'll find the script that we're using. So here is the script for the XS-security JSON file. So I'm going to paste that in. Okay, and basically what it does is it said we're going to create an app name called tinyworld. We're going to create a scope, and in it is app name.OData service user. I'm going to create a role template, which we'll call the generic OData access role. It's basically to allow people to access OData from our Java OData service. So let's save that. Now at this point, you can't actually activate and run this when you're working directly within a Web IDE for HANA. So what we need to do is to create it using the command line. So for that, I'm going to just right mouse button on there, and I'm going to export the file. We'll drop it into our downloads folder. And then I'm going to use the command line. So I'm going to go to the command prompt and just change to the downloads folder and just check that the file's there. Yep, we've got our XS security JSON. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use the XS command. Now you'll see in previous videos in the XS Advanced series how to set all of that up. You may be using, for example, XS API to make your first connection where you point to your XS Advanced system, and then you would do XS login when you want to log in, for example, as the XS Advanced administrator user. Now I've already done that. In fact, if I put in XS, I can see things directly. So let's just check XS version, just check it's all connected and working correctly. So yep, I can see I've got my endpoint and my XS is working. Now the first thing I would need to do is to make sure I'm targeting my developer space. Because remember we created a space called dev previously. So I'm going to do XS and then T for target, or you can type in target, -S for space, and then dev. And once I've done that, I can look and see, well, what apps have we got? XS apps. So we've got a Java app there, and also XS services, and we should find here, this is where we have our HDI container. So we can see we've got an app and services already set up. Now what we need to now do is create our own service. So we're going to use actually the command you'll find on our GitHub repository. It says XS create service command. So I'm going to actually copy that, and I should be able to paste that into my command line. So XS create-service. The service is going to be based on the XS UAA, so the User Authentication Authorization Service of XS Advanced. Dev user specifies that we can actually have multiple developers work with their own individual ones, and then we're going to call out tiny UAA. So we're given our own name for the service, and then we need to specify all sorts of parameters and settings for this, and that's where we reference our XS-security.json file. So obviously with the // we're assuming it's in the current directory. So let's run that and create our service. So it's now run. So if we now go back and do access services, we should find that our tiny UAA service is up and running. So the next thing we need to do is to make sure that our application uses this UAA service. So for that, what we need to do is to go to the MTA YAML file. And you probably worked with these already when you're using XS Advanced. Be careful, it's spaces and not tabs for indentation. We can see we've got each of our modules, TinyDB, TinyJava, and we've also got the resources. So here we've got HDI container, for example. Now we've added a new resource, which is our UAA. So what I'm going to do is the first thing is just add to the resources section a little bit of script. So here you'll see in the resources section, what we need to add in is a reference to our custom UAA or user authentication and authorization service. So now we've referenced it, what kind it is, and that's very, very good to have it ready there for the future. Now what we also need to do is make sure that we set up our Java application as something that's going to be available to other applications. And again, we've seen this in previous videos when we worked with Tiny World and we had XSJS talk to HTML5 and vice versa. So here we can see in the modules section, what we need to do is add in a little bit of code here. We need to say that this actually provides a service that we're going to be able to access from other modules. So we're going to call it actually the tinyjava_API. And also we're going to need to make sure that tinyjava uses our custom user authentication and authorization service. So for that we need to add in this line here with our requires saying that we're going to reference and use that service. So that can go, basically, we can add that just before our HDI container. Make sure you've got correct indentations and it's spaces, not tabs. So that's now set up. However, there's one other thing that we would need to do. We need to create an HTML5 app that we want to call this from. So for that, we can use the right mouse button on our project, new, and create a basic HTML5 module, for example. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll call it Tiny UI. It will create as basically a very simple Hello World kind of button application. So it's created Tiny UI. But we'll notice now that in the MTA YAML file, Tiny UI has been added as an application. So now we need to make some changes there so that it can consume this Java OData service. So for that, if we go down, we'll see we've got Tiny UI, HTML5, but we need to add in this requires section. So it's going to do a couple of things. Let's just paste that in. We can see that it's requiring the Tiny UAA for the user authentication. That's good. We've got a nice secure system. We can also see that we're requiring the tinyjava_API that we defined for our Java OData service. So it's going to be able to consume that. And it's going to put that in as a destination. So this will allow us to get around CORS, cross-origin resource sharing, because it will look like, in fact, effectively that this is part of the UI app itself, as far as the client web browser is concerned. So we can specify that. And you do need to mention here on line 38 the forward auth token as true. So we've now specified that in the MTA YAML file, so we can save it. But we're not quite done yet. What we need to now do is also set up a route in our UI to actually refer to this destination. In Tiny UI, you'll see there's normally an xs-app JSON file. And in there, we're saying how we're going to authenticate and what routes we've got. So this is where we're going to set up actually our folder structure so we can access. Now again, so you don't have to write all of that from scratch. You can copy and paste that code directly from the GitHub version we've got, assuming you created a project with the same name, of course, otherwise you might have to make changes. Notice that the authentication method has been set to root because we're using routing for authentication now. And in the root section, we've pasted in, we've got actually our Java OData v4. That's going to be a path that's going to be kind of, the browser will think that's local. It's on the same server as the UI, the HTML5, but in reality, that's going to get passed back to our TinyJava backend. So it's going to go to our destination. And we specify at this point, you're going to need just to use this, the OData service user scope. So that's something we set up with that xs-security and our user authentication a moment ago. So we're looking good. Let's save that. Now what we would need to do is to go ahead and rebuild. So we can build the Java application because we made changes to the web XML. So that's now finished. Let's go ahead and build the UI. That's now done. Now there's just one other thing we need to do. As we've set up, basically we've got this authentication, this role, we need to make sure that our user is actually authorized to use this. So we need to go and do some role configuration. Now that's not something the developer does directly themselves. Normally this is something that the XS Advanced administrator would be involved with. So I'm going to now just create a incognito window. That saves me logging out because I'm going to log in as my administrator to the XS Advanced admin. You've seen in previous videos how you can access the admin. I'm going to use my admin user, log on as that user. So now we see the administration side, and one of the areas is the application role builder. And if we go in there, what we should now see once we've built our application is that we actually have a tiny world, then exclamation U1, because that just makes it unique, a tiny world application in our system. And you'll see it's got this generic OData access role. That's basically come through our definition from the XS-security JSON file. So what I need to do is configure a role collection for this. So you go to role collections, and then you can see here are the ones we've already got. You may have seen this before if you did the actual configuration and setup for Web IDE itself. Hit plus sign to add a new one. I can call it, for example, Tiny World User or OData User, whatever you want. Hit create. What I need to do then is add my role into it. So I'm going to add the application role, and this is where I would select my Tiny World exclamation U1 and then my generic OData access role, and the application role again the same. So once that's selected, I'd hit save. So we've now saved our role collection. I can go back to the main menu. We've set up basically a role, but I now need to assign that role to a user. So we'll take our developer user. So in user management, I can go to my XS Advanced developer user, look at the role collections. We see he's a Web IDE developer, etc., etc. And now I'm going to add the one we just created, which is Tiny World User. So that's now been added. Of course, I need to save it. And now I should be good to go. So let's have a look. Let's go back to our main Web IDE. What we want to do is actually run our applications. So the Java, let's just make sure that that's up and running again. Yep, so that's now running. We can see the URL. Now we've got the UI. We need to make sure that that's running. We'll have it run the index.html. Now we may need to log in. So make sure it's the developer user. That's because we've now specified that there's actually a scope just to use the application. We can see we've got the standard template index.html, but what we really care about is actually this Java OData v4 path, because that's how our UI is going to access. So now we see we get access to it. It says OData service error because we haven't done the correct endpoint. So again, we can put in Tiny World, the name of the project, then the name of the module, which is tinydb, dot, underscore, dot, then your context, which is tinyf. Remember, you'll find all of that in your CDS entry. And now we should be able to see that we get some information out, and we can do our metadata call, for example, to get the full metadata. For example, if we wanted to use the master detail template to actually build a UI like that. So we can see we've got a fully working application. We've got an OData service. It's an OData version 4 service. It was generated using Java, but we're now accessing that from our HTML5 UI, and effectively we've got all security defined. It's all set up correctly, and we're accessing it through a path, which is our Java OData v4 path. What we've seen in this video is how we've taken the Java OData service that we set up in the previous video, and now we've added a UI to it, and we've done all of the configuration necessary, including creating a custom user authentication and authorization service, an XS UAA service. We also, as the administrator user, went and defined the role collection. We assigned that role collection to our developer user. And of course, in the MTA YAML file, we defined all of the different interdependencies between our micro apps, different services that we've got in our overall Tiny World project, put it together, and then we're able to access our OData service. So that's OData version 4 with Java and an HTML5 app. That's something you can do with HANA 2.0 SPS 0. Thanks for watching. You'll find more videos and playlists on our YouTube channel. Also, consider following us on Twitter or connect with us on LinkedIn.